I just want some Dogecoin, man. Ah! Hikaru Utada, I would throw a brick at a school of fish, maybe just a school full of children, just for Utada Hikaru just to look in my direction for about 5 seconds. Fumetsu no Anate, if it didn't have the best first episode of the season, it couldn't have had worse than maybe the second best. Like, if it wasn't better than Mars Red, it couldn't have been that. I don't know what it wasn't better than aside from that. Welcome back. We're back for another episode of the weekly podcast, the spring 2021 anime weekly podcast. In case you're confused at where you are and you didn't read the title, we've got 8 shows to talk about today, but we're gonna do this a little bit differently. We're not gonna talk about all 8 shows for like 5 to 10 minutes a piece. That's fucking ridiculous. It's not necessarily that the last episode went an hour. It's more like I just don't have an hour worth of content to say about 8 fucking shows. Like, I don't have 5 minutes worth of something to say about every show, because not every show has 5 minutes worth of content every single episode worth talking about. So we're not going to do it that way. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to focus on shows that have something worth talking about, and we're just going to talk about them. And the other shows that I watched that week, I'll just do a very quick speed overview of, essentially. So I kind of want to see if I can get my stopwatch to fucking, or my watch to work. Oddly enough, this fucking watch is stupid because, like, it comes with a, like a clock, but not a stopwatch. You have to install it as an app, which is fucking dumb. But anyways, I want to, at some point, I'll have this set up for next week. I want to have it so that, like, I spend like a minute on each show, pretty much. But we're going to start basically by doing speed reviews of all of the stuff that I don't think deserves a full 5 to 10 minutes worth talking about. And that starts with Mars Red, which was good. And I was happy to see that the first episode wasn't really a standalone episode. I was a little concerned at first, primarily because that first episode just comes off as something very theatrical, and when you realize that the episode is actually it's an adaptation of a screenplay called Salome, then things are really confusing, or confusing in the sense that you don't know if what you're getting into is actually representative of the series, if that first episode was representative of the series or not. But it is context for everything else that happens. It's a precedent, so that's good. World building's really done progressively. It's nice. It's still a great representation of its setting in 1930. Actually, this is not 1931 Japan. That was a mistake that I made. It's actually 1921 or 1923 Japan, which is a different context, right? It's a vastly different context than if we were in 1931. I liked seeing the new characters. I liked the interactions that we all saw. I thought everything was pretty interesting. It was pretty fun. And that's basically all I had to say about Mars Red. There was nothing that, stood out in regards to a conversational topic, which is why we're doing a speed review of it. That's generally how these speed reviews are going to work. That's a good example, right? Not a good example. These can go faster, and you'll probably see it in this one for Higehiro, because that show was also solid. I watched episode 2. I watched episode 1 of Mars Red, but I watched episode 2 of Higehiro. It's still solid. I'm gonna have to pull a Kevin Samuels here. I don't know why females seem to be so frustrated, particularly in this show, when you have a crush on them and they reject you, and you go after some other female kind of soon afterwards. Am I just supposed to sit there and be miserable? Like, the fuck? I understand that you wanted to feel special, but if you wanted to feel special, you should have said yes to the proposal and not, no, I've been dating a guy for 5 fucking years and we're basically married. Would have made life much easier on your hands, Goto. Anywho, that was literally all the notes I had for Higehiro. Okay, well, off the top of my head, I liked the dynamic of getting her the cell phone. I thought that the entire idea of having to buy the girl the cell phone so that she didn't refuse was kind of cute, and I've had to deal with it on my own in certain situations with females. And that was basically all I had about Higehiro. It's solid, but again, not much to talk about, nothing worth a discussion. Vivy, also not really worth a discussion this week, because most of what was interesting about Vivy I kind of covered within the last 20 minutes of the fucking podcast last week. It's still good. It's still good. I don't want to say very good. I think there are certain shows that are very good. It's still good. I think the world building in particular was done very well. This gradual shooting up into space seems just kind of majestic when it first happens, and then you're on this space hotel, and they just do a good job with working with anti-gravity and all of this other stuff. It's just great use of the setting, great use of gradual world building. The only thing that I do worry about with Vivi, and I thought about turning this into its own segment, but I think I can get my thesis up rather quickly. I am slightly concerned that Vivi may have an issue in the future with predictability. I say in the future because I don't think it necessarily mattered in the context of this episode, because even though I think all of us understood that, you know, blonde-haired girl is an enemy of sorts or an antagonist of sorts, that it wasn't necessarily bothersome because the conflict here is going to be how do Vivi and Matsumoto resolve it, and not if she's the enemy or not. But I do think in the future this can end up being a problem, because essentially the series' conflicts are not going to be, the conflicts essentially are going to be between Vivi and Matsumoto and what they perceive to be right. But if one of them is obviously right and the other one is obviously wrong, then we're going to have a feeling of things being dragged out much longer than they need to be for us to get to the part where the show actually gets good, which is how it resolves the conflict, and not whether there is a conflict itself. Because I understand that the premise of the show, the premise of having these two characters clash, is to see if they actually do legitimately have some sort of conflicts with each other, or they have ideological conflicts with each other. But if it's obvious that one of them's right, and there's no gray area, then it completely defeats the premise. So that's just something to keep in mind. I don't think it was an issue for this episode. I just bring it up because I am somewhat cautionary about it. And I don't think it would make the show terrible. I just think it would end up making the show feel like when you play a game and you're playing then you have to watch, how should I say this? You're playing the game, but you're playing the game just to get to the next cutscene. Yeah. Yeah, or actually, I guess it'd be the other way around. You're watching these cutscenes just so you can finish the game. I guess you're playing a game made by the developers of Heavy Rain or something. Megalobox 2, Marla's thick. I'm so mad that her husband is still alive. I thought I was kind of on the train. I guess I am not on the Megalobox train, or I'm not on the Marla's train. I wanted to conduct Marla's train, and I wanted it to just be me and maybe her son too. Speaking of her son, we finally get a nigga in anime, and, you know, you got a nigga that look like me, and, he just lie, steal, fucking sell his homies out. That's a bad look for us. We got some perceptions to change as an African American community. I did think the only thing that was kind of questionable about this episode, I thought Joe getting back into boxing so soon seems kind of inconsistent with his initial portrayal of depression and grief. You see him on drug addictions, and he's struggling to wean off of them, and you know, he can't get over the idea of having killed his prior friend and blah blah blah, etc., or his coach and blah blah blah, etc. But I just think it's odd that he moved off of it so quickly, primarily because we saw how painful and difficult it was. And for him to just be able to drown and dump the drugs out, and to seemingly at the end of the episode not experience any side effects, seemed sort of like a plot hole, but also just inconsistent with the portrayal of depression that was originally shown. That was my only complaint with Megalobox. Generally speaking, I thought the episode was pretty good. I just liked the idea of how it ended, but didn't like how it was executed, and don't appreciate how the subtleties were and nuances were missed. So now we can get into the shows that are actually worth talking about for extended periods of time. And the first one we're going to start with is all of these are new shows with the exception of Joran. Joran just has something interesting I'd like to talk about, but 86 is where we're going to start. I first watched 86 and I went, wow, that was bad. And upon rewatch, when I was actually making notes, getting things ready for the video, I changed my mind. I don't think it's very bad. I just think it's not good. I just think it's below average, which is different from it being very bad, because I thought that the first half in particular and parts of the second half were just like, what the fuck am I watching? This is not a good start. But in retrospect, I don't have nearly as negative of the opinion as I thought I had on it. So let's start with some of the positives, because there's a lot of stuff that I did not enjoy, obviously. The positives are that I like the art direction, particularly in the second half. I think it's saturated well. I like how characters are designed. I like the general shading in that first scene where we're getting an overview of the city, and Melise is just walking, and there's just like these really cool shots, this really nice, cool, not really monotonic shading, but it's just really, really, really gorgeous scenery, really nice shading, blah, 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 etc. And that's about where most of the compliments stop, because after that 2-minute introduction, where we get a lot of hope because that everything's well storyboarded, tone seems pretty serious, and it seems pretty aware of what the hell it's doing. Then we get into this very one-dimensional characterization of people within the army itself that are just laughing about, ha ha ha, these niggas at 86 fucking suck. We killed so many people. Ha ha ha, ha ha ha, we're so cool, ha ha ha. Hey Melise, look at your fat ass. And I mean, like, I also said look at your fat ass, but like the difference being that I'm not a part of the military and you're not watching 86 for me. So even if I'm one-dimensional, like, they're not allowed to be. And it's not necessarily that they're one-dimensional, but it's a showcase alongside the very first scene where you have these robots jumping onto this, or in the middle of this war, and they're just talking about, ha ha ha, oh wow, we're gonna kill everybody, it's gonna be so cool to see all your blood on my faces, and blah 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 blah. I just don't like how one-dimensional everything feels, especially when there are points in the episode, which I'll talk about later, that are actually pretty well handled. Like, they're pretty nuanced, well handled conflicts and traumas. So I just don't understand what's with the inconsistency. First the inconsistency and the dimensionality. I don't even know if that's a word. The dimensionality of the. So we're back. My camera I cut off because I forgot to clear off the SD card. So you're gonna notice probably a couple of different things. One, I'm not slouching in my chair as much. I didn't realize I was looking like a fucking slob like that. We'll definitely be cognizant of that in the future. Two, I think I turned down the gain a little bit, and I don't even know what I was gonna say third. But we were talking about the inconsistency of tone regarding trauma in 86, and generally, or not trauma in 86, but it's enemy characters and the inconsistency in their depth. And I just thought it was, worth noting that show seems to not understand to just make characters not seem like one-dimensional villains if you want us to believe that there is any semblance of nuance within it. Let's see, tone of traumas. And this is a pretty important one. Again, it's inconsistent here because it does a pretty good job of making the death or the killing that the Undertaker has to do, that Sheen has to do towards the end of the episode. It makes it seem legitimately painful, and it frames it in a rather mature light. But then earlier on in the episode, we just have this over dramatization of people dying in war and these really harsh revelations as Melise's unit is dying, but they're not handled in these ways that are seemingly, I don't know, how should I say this, respectfully traumatic and respectfully dramatic. It just seems like over dramatized, like with Hell's Kitchen music in the background and a bunch of screaming and like this really, I don't know, I almost wanted to say masculine feminine voice that's kind of angry and shouting and seeming kind of edgy, and that was essentially what I was getting at, right? It's just there's just this inconsistency of how the trauma itself is going to be dramatized, and I just don't see why this is an issue or why this is happening. Because generally speaking, the show has shown a competence of being able to properly create drama for these trauma, and a lot of times it's not even needed. You don't really have to do any sort of special directing. Tone switching is a gigantic issue. Okay, tone switching has typically not been an issue with a lot of shows since like Shigatsu, but it is a very big problem here because there are multiple times where they try to do this transition where something drops or falls on the floor and it transitions immediately to some sort of war segment. But the problem is that transition it's more visually impressive or more visually appealing than it is consistent, if I should say. It doesn't feel natural. And even when I said that it's more visually impressive, I don't think it's really all that visually impressive. Like if a cake drops on the floor and you immediately go to a shot of somebody, like of a cannon shooting, I don't think that's necessarily a clever transition. I think you just did a hard split cut that was different in tone, or a hard cut between two shots that are entirely part of different scenes with entirely different tones. And again, it's just an inconsistency. The whole show is just seemingly inconsistent, but when it's bad and it's inconsistent, then it's noticeably bad because the tone switch from weird cheery and eating cake to cannon exploding, or where everybody's getting ready for breakfast and now there's a dead decaying body that has pig written all over it, or we're all eating lunch and a cat's hopping on me and now one of our soldiers is dead and I have to kill him, it's just too all over the place. And it leads to these traumatic events not having the tone that they should have because we are prepped for some other tone and we have been lulled into some other state. That's why tone switching is bad. Tone switching is bad because if it's done from the bad scene to the comedy, it feels out of place because it feels as if it's attempting to not necessarily retcon the trauma, but it's attempting too hard to, how do I want to say this, nullify the effects of the trauma, and it just seems ungenuine and it's disrespectful. And when it comes afterwards, when you tone switch from something that's happy to something that's supposed to be traumatic or sad, then instead what we just have is I can't get into the proper mindset for enjoying whatever, or not enjoying per se, but experience whatever trauma just happened or whatever drama is about to happen because I'm too conditioned for this joy and stimulation in this other manner. So tone switching's pretty bad here. I hope that's something that gets remedied because a lot of shows don't struggle with that anymore. I thought that was a 2014 and before problem. It apparently is not. Another problem, info dumping about information that characters in the show should already know. Telling Melise about all of this stuff regarding the 80s, not necessarily the 86 unit per se, but telling her about all of this stuff regarding Paradade and the mechs and all of this info dumping about the world and blah 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 blah. This isn't something that you typically do between characters in the world that are this high in a position of power. It would have made sense if Melise didn't know about this because she's some civilian and she's getting informed on all of this all of a sudden. She is of a position of royalty and power, and she's always been in this bloodline, so it just doesn't make any sense. Like, she's just like her father, but she's not just like her father in regards to information that you would believe would propagate down the family and propagate down the assembly line or the hierarchy of power, but that's not how apparently it works. And so we get info dumped on stuff that the character should know. And it's also unfortunate because we're getting info dumped, but we're not getting info dumped enough to truthfully understand what the fuck is going on, right? Like, if you're gonna info dump me, at least give me all the fucking information. There are, I remember having to go to the Mal synopsis to kind of understand why is 86, why are these 86 people a part of 86? And I still don't really understand why they are. I don't think the episode really addresses it. I at first didn't understand that the government was essentially hiding the 86, or the fact that they were in mechs, but that the public didn't know that they were in mechs until, like, I went back in the episode and was like, oh yeah, that's the correlation between this initial starting scene and the fact that there are people dying in these mechs out here. That's a government cover-up. So that was my mistake upon first watch. But there are just confusing things that the show doesn't really address. And then there are terms and concepts that the show does address but feel unnatural because the characters should already know about these certain things. So maybe it would have been better to just have this info dumped to a civilian. That way it at least made sense that the civilian didn't know what the fuck was going on. But that's essentially my complaint there. I wasn't a fan of the storyboarding per se. I thought it was pretty well shot until halfway through, and then things start to fall apart once there's that scene where Melise leaves the flashback with whoever the commander is that's assigning her to her new platoon or her new squadron or whatever. And she's like separated between this barrier between her and Annette, and Annette is supposed to be on the other side of this wall, but it's not really clear because the first shot you see is from Annette's office and there's a glass window, but you can't really see the glass. And then there's the second shot where you see it from next to Millet, and then Annette's through a window, but there's not enough glare on the window to understand that they're talking through a window. And this was only a problem because the sound design reflected the fact that they were talking through a window, but it wasn't apparent via the storyboarding or the framing of the shot because there's not enough glare in the shot. So then there's another shot soon afterwards where they're walking through this hallway, and it's framed so that about half of the shot is taken up by the corner of this wall that they're about to be walking behind, you would think, except they never actually walk behind the wall. Like the shot cuts off before they actually get around the corner, so it's just kind of hard to see them walk towards the camera. It's like, why are you blocking off why are you blocking off half of my view for something that's not relevant, that the characters don't actually go into, that they don't actually interact with, right? Just some confusing storyboarding choices there, but it's better shot in the second half. Those storyboarding issues are primarily issues towards the end of the first half. Most of my problems with the show are towards the end of the first half of the show. With the second half, I don't really have too many issues with. And I think, is that everything I had? The one compliment, I do think, again, I mentioned this before, the handling of Sheen walking to his teammate to go put the guy down was really well handled. I think it probably will not get as much credit as it probably should. I thought it was somber. It was pretty well handled. They let the action finish up without it being over dramatized with music and stuff in the background and blah blah blah, etc. I just thought it was really well done, and I don't think that the show. I think that's an apparent showcase of the show clearly knowing how to handle trauma and just not handling it that way throughout the rest of the episode. So we'll see. We'll see if 86 gets any better. I am a little worried about the show. I don't think it'll be terrible, but I do wonder if this is a showcase of what is to come, then I think there is reason to be concerned. And with, and Hitoriie. Hitoriie openings, baby, you know what it is. Hitoriie openings are the only ones we remember from this season, except for Fumetsu no Ananta. That's the only exception. Hikaru Utada, I would throw a brick at a school of fish, maybe just a school full of children, just for Utada Hikaru just to look in my direction for about 5 seconds. And I'd probably kick a baby dolphin or throw an axe at it just for her to like fucking talk to me. But that all aside, Fumetsu no Anata is really good. Its first episode was unprecedented for me in this regard. Typically, you don't get connected and feel empathetic about characters or their situations solely within the span of 20 to 30 minutes. I have problems doing it within the span of an hour to 2 hours. Like with movies, it doesn't work for me. I personally don't really like watching movies, and part of it is because I can't get an emotional connection to somebody over the course of 2 hours, right? But this is a rare exception, because it's just so well handled. There are just so many. The show's so clever. It just does so much right. So I have a list, obviously. I did think here's one funny thing, that the introduction to the show, the monologue that they give, is literally just the mouse synopsis. I just thought it was funny because as it was happening, I was just like, I've read and heard all of this before. Anywho, back to the idea of making these character deaths mean something, despite the fact that I only know this character for 20 fucking minutes. First off, that MC is established as the guy that we meet is established as this very optimistic guy making the best of his surroundings, despite the fact that fate has not been on his side and has clearly damned him with a ending that is probably not going to be favorable, right? But regardless of that, he doesn't complain about the situation. He keeps his head up and he moves forward, right? Not completely unheard of for a shonen, obviously, but I do think that this is a different case of them not painting the MC as a victim, despite the audience understanding that he is a victim of his situation. I think it's very important that when you're going to set up a character that's going to be empathizable like this, that they shouldn't feel like victims of their own situation. Like, I hate to draw a comparison to this show every single time I have a complaint about something, but it's always the perfect show to draw a comparison with because it just tends to have the flaws or examples of how things are badly handled. Boku no Hero. Boku no Hero, if you remember, when Deku's first introduced, they show him getting bullied, right? You know, he's crying, he's on the ground, victim of his own situation. He's crying when All Might's, you know, like there, and he realizes that he doesn't have any powers and blah, 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 and he's not capable of getting them, blah, 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 etc. It's hard for me to care about Deku in that situation, not because we've only seen him for 5 fucking minutes, but also because the show is just painting him as this pathetic figure, right? Hard for me to care for this person who just seems inherently pathetic, and I understand is a victim to their own situation, but is not trying to do anything to make the best out of it. That is a complete contrast to this character here, who is put into this situation where he's isolated in the middle of a fucking Iceland with nobody there, and he's drawing on the walls even though it seems fucking crazy. It actually is a sign of, like, you know, like insanity due to solitude and blah, 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 etc. But he's making the best of the situation, and the show doesn't victimize him by bringing up the fact that they all left him or showing some traumatic flashback. And that helps tremendously because I have respect for the character before these terrible things happen. And then there's this series of unfortunate events. So here's something that the show does right as well to make me care about this character, right? It's a correct usage of tone switching. It's funny because we literally just talked about 86 and tone switching, right? But tone switching in Fumetsu no Anata-e is handled very differently. What happens is you have this situation or this event that is very painful or obviously detrimental to the main character, and despite the fact that it is supposed to be something that is a bad event, the show will immediately attempt, and this is the key word here, it will attempt to flip its tone on you, to flip the tragedy that's happening, you know, this tragedy that we're watching develop into something optimistic that resembles the mindset and the perspective of the main character. And that's smart and impressive because essentially it's just replicating the mind of the main character inside of you. What it allows you to show, or what it's basically showcasing, right, is, or what it helps in showcasing is this deterioration of this optimism within the main character. And it also lets you gain a level of pity for this guy who's constantly going through all these tragedies and is keeping his head up the entire fucking time. And it's also pitiful because you understand that he's losing his own sanity, and his sanity is clearly deteriorating alongside his optimism. And that's the best part of the show, right? The showcase of deteriorating optimism as it's going on. I didn't really notice a lot of this stuff until I went back and watched it a second time getting notes. It is so fucking clever. This show is so clever with how it frames things, with how it brings up certain events and the way that it brings them up, how it flips tone to its advantage, how it does tone switching to its advantage. And it's all in this attempt to showcase this deteriorating optimism before we set out on this story, right? So you first see his optimism deteriorate when he gets injured and he goes, we're not going back to the dog, right? And nobody said that you were ever going to go back. He's talking to himself, right? So the first hint of his deteriorating optimism, he's already fucking questioning himself. He's he gets injured. He's he says we're not going back after he gets injured. His leg gets injured, but Dog didn't say anything. He just looked at the guy and was like, "Are you gonna be okay?" They move on, and the next day his leg's still bleeding, and there's this beautiful fucking shot of the guy attempting to smile, but the smile just being so clearly full of distraught and tears, knowing that his journey is essentially over, but that he's going to keep attempting to push through it solely because he's fucking desperate, and he's trying to hold on to the sense of optimism despite the fact that it's pretty clear that he's not going to reach these people and they're never coming back. He's talking to himself. He starts misattributing all of the things in his doubt and guilt towards the dog as opposed to himself. And then the final nail in the coffin is when they get to this gravesite. I'm assuming this is a graveyard, right? When they get to this gravesite and he just fucking lets it all out. Like, at first when they arrive, he attempts to find some sort of joy in this, and you as the audience are just staring at the guy the exact same way the dog is. Like, you're just sitting in here like, you can't make a positive out of this, bro. And it's when he realizes that he can't keep up this facade of optimism anymore, that he just fucking breaks. And it's legitimately painful to watch him acknowledge his delusion, because he's clinging to this sense of optimism the entire episode, and then it all just fucking crumbles down at once. And they've made him somebody who's a respectable figure and made him a victim of his situation, despite the fact that, or I should change that, we the audience have acknowledged he's a victim of his situation without the show having to explicitly fucking state it. And it's just so well handled, this idea of deteriorating optimism. There's also this nice usage of storyboarding to showcase this. In particular, the show does a really cool thing with its fire and its snow as the episode is going on. So as his optimism is deteriorating, it's represented by this fire, right? Like, literally passion represented as fire. Not uncommon, right? But the show does a good job of, when he first gets injured and it snows up the tent, right? It just covers up the tent in snow with a pretty big portion of the tent unfrozen, showcasing the fire inside of the tent, showcasing that his optimism, he's about halfway done with his battle here. There's a point where the tent is basically like entirely covered in snow, and then we keep going and the fires don't even come on anymore, right? Like, we get back to the cabin and Guy doesn't even turn the fire on because at that point he's entirely broken. And more interesting is that at the beginning of the episode, if you notice, the first shot that they show of the house, there's no snow at the end of the house, or at the door of the house, but there is by the end of the episode, because they literally trap him inside of the cabin with no light, showcasing that he's trapped and he's never getting out. He's done. He's dead. There's just really good storyboarding. Presentation framing's clever. Fumetsu no Anate, if it didn't have the best first episode of the season, it couldn't have had worse than maybe the second best. Like, if it wasn't better than Mars Red, it couldn't have been that. I don't know what it wasn't better than aside from that. I was impressed. I was very much impressed. I've never been one to get attached to shows that quickly, but I call me a fucking fan, because this did in 20 minutes what Koi no Katachi, a work by the exact same writer, could not do in an hour and a half to 2 fucking hours runtime. Let's move on to the next show, Shadow House. I don't have a ton to say about Shadow House, primarily because I think people are probably going to want me to talk about it critically. There's not much to talk about here. There's not a bunch of theory craft, or everything that I would talk about is all theory crafting related, and I don't want to get into theory crafting because who fucking cares? The show will do what the fuck it does. I don't really care about creating theories and so on and so forth. I'm here to analyze and have discussions about stuff, and I don't really care about, story details or whatever. Let's not get into theory crafting, essentially, but let's talk about some strengths of the show, because I actually do think that it does some things well. I want to start off with something that Anime Brandon, I think is his name, brought up. He's an episodic reviewer. I just happened to see his review as I was just scrolling down YouTube and blah, blah, blah. And most of it is a summary, But he does bring up this one particular point about how the show utilizes space and its setting, despite the fact that the show essentially takes place in 2 to 3 rooms the entirety of the episode. It doesn't feel claustrophobic. It feels much more open and massive in scope. Part of that is this first shot that we give, showcasing how wide this mansion is. How wide this mansion is. I might want to take a drink of water in a bit, but part of it is also, right, framing in this show is done meticulously. So I took notes in particular about how it's attempting to frame its shots. And one thing there are a couple of things that I noticed. The first is that it frames most of its shots so that its main characters are always in, not just simply always in shot, but they're in shot close to the camera, but not claustrophobically, right? Not so that they are hoarding your view of the camera, but they are placed within the idea of rule of thirds, right? And the camera is zoomed in close enough so that you don't get an entire landscape of the fucking room. So that way, when we come back to this room, we can there are other places of the room that have not been explored yet. That's helpful, because next time you place a camera, you can just move it to another section of the room and it seems like an entirely different portion or location, but it's not. It's all in the same room. There's also, what also helps is this journey to Kate's quarter. So when the doll first wakes up, I ended up forgetting what her name was. I think it ended up being like Elena or something like that. I don't fucking know. But when she first wakes up and she takes this journey towards Kate's room, there's just this long, maybe 2-3 minute journey, nicely animated and blah blah blah, etc. It's charming, but more importantly is that length and how it kind of shows these long corridors and the difficulty in getting to the place and blah blah blah, etc. and this march up the stairs and blah blah blah, etc. That journey is important because it just characterizes, or not characterizes, it just showcases the massiveness of the mansion. And it also just adds, it gives us a sense of distance distance and size as we move into this second room, which is just Kate's quarters or Kate's living room or whatever that we're in for the majority of the episode. And then we also go to the bedroom. So there's really, there's 3 rooms that we're basically in. There's only like one wide shot of the room the entire episode. It's like this top-down shot at 1636. I reference torrent times, but I guess Funimation probably has the same timestamps. Yeah, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's just an overhead shot. There's the doll on the left side. There's the shadow on the right side. She's staring out a window. This gradual contrast of light going towards the doll side also helps with this, right? Because the shot itself is rather expansive, but it's also the light and how it's diffusing backwards is indicative of the distance, obviously. So it just makes the shot seem more spacious. So the show just has this really nice sense of spacing and framing to make the fact that you're only in 2 to 3 rooms not feel obnoxious and boring and dull. I just think that's really cool. And it's not something I would have thought about if Anime Brandon didn't bring it up. So I just wanted to give him a shout out for that. Aside from that, again, not really much to talk about. I like the usage of color. I think there's really strong characterization. I think the use of Ash and showcasing characterization of the shadows is really interesting, considering they don't have a face. So it's pretty impressive when I actually care and I know what they're feeling and blah blah blah, etc. But that's all, because everything else is going to go into theory crafting. Also, the character, or not the character designs, the dress design of the princess looks, or the shadow, because I don't remember anybody's fucking name in the show. The shadow reminded me of Gankutsu. I liked the abstract patterned art. And that leaves us with one more show, but I'm going to stop the recording real quick so that way I can actually finish it. So we're back. Let's talk about Joran, right? I am falling in love with this fucking show. All right. This setting is being utilized pretty properly. I like the showcase of the trains and the construction and the modernization of Japan, you know. Makes me a little wet, makes me a little horny, you know. I like the usage of red and blue within the setting. I like that it uses these earthly tones, and then pop, there's a red devil on screen in the form of Yukimura and the blood that she's fucking splattering across it. I like the usage of blue. We talked about the usage of blue. I'm in love with the usage of blue in this show. Reminds me like that of Black Rock Shooter, but the setting's not as coolly colored, so it's not really as rampant. So when it appears, it just is. It's just beautiful. You know, Jodan's just great. But the thing I wanted to talk about in particular today was this idea of gray characters and why the hell they're so important. Why is it so important to have grayed lines when you have shows like this in particular that are historical, they're dramas, they're action shows, and they're revenge plots? Why the fuck does it matter so much? Because these add tension to the show, and they add a level of unpredictability. So one thing that the show does very well is that it very well establishes the fact that all of these characters are working for their own different motives. Asahi, as we saw in this episode, is working to get revenge on Yukimura. Yukimura is working to get revenge for her family, and now she feels guilted by the fact that she killed Asahi's family and has made another victim of the situation, and blah blah blah, etc. I mean, there's just, and it's not just those two, right? There's Yuki attempting to persuade Asahi during the course of the episode. There's the commander checking up on Yukimura despite the fact that he seems to be clearly using her and everybody else involved. All of these people are apparently attempting to protect Tokugawa, but it's pretty obvious that all of this stuff is going to fall down as there is a regime essentially against the guy, and at some point it may become obvious that people within Nue itself are attempting to actually overthrow Tokugawa as well, and they're just attempting to do it from the inside out or something along those lines. I don't actually know, that's just me speculating or whatever, but point being, and the grandma. There's a grandma that gets introduced in the episode that knows like all of this different stuff. Throat is dying, but she knows like all this different stuff. She has like this absurd memory capacity, and she is solely working for Nue so that they don't kill her son. So despite the fact that there is a mutual agreement here, there's not really a sense of alliance, which is why when the end of the episode happens, it is so shocking in a sense. But I mean, it's not necessarily that it's shocking, but it lays in stone the fact that nobody, despite the fact that they all are allied with each other, are actually allies. Like they're simply people with a slew of mutual interests, and if deviating from the plan will get them to their intended consequence, then they will deviate from the plan. And it just adds this level of unpredictability because I wouldn't even go as far as to say it's a chess game. It's just that there are so many pieces on the chess board that are seemingly autonomous that it's kind of impossible to predict where the fuck we're going or what is going to happen at certain points of the story. And that's so fucking important for a show like this because it's a revenge story, right? Like we don't want to just know Yukimura is just going to go out after her family's been killed and she's just gonna fucking slaughter everybody and get everything the way that she wants it. Like, that's boring, right? But for it to work like this, where there are so many different characters with so many different motivations, and they're all working in contrast with each other despite the fact that they're all supposed to be allies, you just get this level of unpredictability that simply can't be replicated by a lot of other shows during the season. So it just stands out. And that may be the best part of Jodan. It's just, there's so many gray lines. I can't even see them. They're just blending in with the environment. I thought Yukimura's guilt and inability to cause another situation like Asahi's was also interesting. I like that it humanizes Yukimura not only by this idea of being consumed with guilt, or not guilt, but this idea of being consumed with revenge, but also that she does have emotions, and she doesn't want to create another victim of the same situation as her. She's bitter, but she's not bitter to every standby person that there was. I think it just adds a little bit more. It humanizes her character more. It also just makes sense, which is good, because we mentioned some shows here that did not make sense. Yukimura had this one fight scene where she's cutting guys in ones. I just thought it was worth mentioning because it just looked really smooth, despite the fact that I did think that the motion of the cut also did kind of look odd. Or maybe it wasn't the motion of the cut, maybe it was the motion of the guys that were moving as Yukimura is like charging towards them. Weird motion blur thing happened. So yeah. And lastly, the ED is fucking gorgeous. Like, it's so fucking gorgeous. If you've not watched the Jodan ED, please, for the love of God, go watch the Jodan ED. I mean, it's just basically a bunch of stills, but they are gorgeous stills. I'm probably going to make all of them my wallpaper. And that will be the end of this week's episode. So, general thoughts. You had my thoughts about all of the quick review shows and stuff and etc. I hope 86 gets good. Currently, it is not. It's maybe not the worst show I've seen this season, but it's close to it. It's within the bottom 3 of shows I've seen this season, and I hope it gets better. Jodan is just eaten. We talked about, what's it called? Fumetsu no Anata as set a precedence for me, or it has done something that's unprecedented for me and made me care for somebody in just one fucking episode. Doesn't happen very often, like, if ever. And the last show, Shadow House, has this really cool utilization of space, and I really hope that it is not just a fun characterization palette, or this nice coded story about representing your personality through various means and blah blah blah, etc. I really do hope that this show develops into something, because it seems like one of the few shows this potential that actually has, or this season that has potential to really be like an 8. I think there's only 2 shows this season that can really be 8s. I think Shadow House has the potential because of how unique it is, and Mars Red has the potential because, despite the fact that it's this vampire story, it's just so damn well directed, and everything it's done so far has been, I mean, basically perfect. Aside from the CG scene at the beginning of episode 1. But that's all I've got. If you guys got anything you want to say, leave it in the comments below. I probably was slouched at the beginning of the episode because this is just a random excerpt. I was going to buy Dogecoin like 2 days ago, right? Because it was at 11 cents. And I decided to hold off because I was looking at like Kraken charts and some other charts, and just saw these massive fucking error bars. Cause so most stock places will do like box plots, but they'll put them kind of on a regression line essentially to show the stock price or the price of a crypto and so whatnot and so forth. So you can see the error bars essentially via the box plot, and those error bars were just fucking massive. So I just assumed it was going to drop. And now it's at 17 cents, and I think it's probably at 18 cents as I'm recording. And there's so much money I could have gained that I did not gain. So I slumped back in my chair, and I wish you a farewell. Thank you for watching. If you guys did enjoy, please leave a like and a comment. And as always, I will see you in the next video. Deuce. I just want some Dogecoin, man. Fuck me. Fuck! Ah! Come and see me, come and see me, come and see me. Bitch, car futures, this shit come with 3 seats. The last feedback, it don't come with TVs. I stopped wearing chrome, it's end of every